All right, today we are diving into a story that's, well, pretty surprising. It's all about beauty school, a really tricky test that was holding back thousands of students, and this brand new law that's completely changing lives and careers down in Kentucky. So yeah, let's get right into it.
I mean, think about that for a second. It's a wild question, right? You'd assume the hardest part would be, the actual hands-on skills. But for a really long time in Kentucky, the single biggest thing stopping someone from starting their career, it wasn't their talent with a comb or a brush. Nope. It was how they did on a written test.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at this Kentucky theory bottleneck. Then, we'll dive into how the top schools rank. After that, we'll see how a new law just changed everything. We'll explore what's called the resilience and mastery model. And finally, we'll zoom out and see how this could be a blueprint for equity across the entire country.
All right, so let's start with the big problem here. For years and years, there was this kind of invisible wall in Kentucky's beauty industry, and researchers have a name for it now, the theory bottleneck.
So what does that actually mean? Well, it's pretty simple. Students were absolutely nailing the hands-on part of the exam, showing they could do the hair, the nails, the skincare, but they were getting completely stuck on the written multiple choice part. And this wasn't just a small issue. It was a huge statewide problem that was putting up a massive roadblock for people trying to get their license.
And wow, this chart really shows you just how bad that bottleneck was. I mean, the numbers are pretty shocking. Look at the practical exam pass rate. It's sitting up there at around 95%. So clearly, students have the skills. But then you look at the theory exam, and that pass rate plummets to just 62%. That's a 30-point gap. It's proof that you could be an amazing, talented stylist and still be totally locked out of your career just because of a written test.
So to figure out how schools were handling this, researchers started digging into the state's data, and what they found was really interesting. It turns out that depending on how you measure success, you get two completely different stories about which schools are actually at the top.
Okay, so if you just look at sheer volume, like which schools are sending the most students to take the exam, you see the big names you'd probably expect, right? Paul Mitchell, Louisville Beauty Academy, Empire. This really just tells us who the biggest schools are.
But now, watch what happens when we flip the script. Instead of volume, let's look at resilience. Which school is helping the most students retake that super tough theory exam? And boom, the whole ranking flips on its head. Louisville Beauty Academy shoots up to #1, and not just by a little, but by a huge margin. And this isn't about who's failing. No, this is about commitment. It's about which school is dedicated to getting its students all the way to the finish line. And that leads us right to the big turning point in this whole story. In March of 2025, a new law, Senate Bill 22, was signed. And it completely, fundamentally changed the game for every single beauty school student in the state of Kentucky.
Okay, and this is the absolute key. The old system was just brutal. If you failed that theory test 3 times, it was devastating. You were slammed with a 6-month waiting period, and you had to fork over money for 80 hours of extra classes. Senate Bill 22 just wiped all of that away. Now, students get unlimited chances to retake the test. If you fail, you just wait 1 month and try again. No more mandatory, expensive classes. The whole focus shifted from punishing people to actually helping them master the material. So with this new law on the books, an educational model that was already out there could finally really take off. And this is what's called the resilience and mastery model. And guess who pioneered it? Yep, the same school that was #1 on that resilience list we just saw. You remember that chart, right? The Louisville Beauty Academy, or LBA, they weren't just #1 in retakes by a little bit, they were helping a massive number of students get that second or third or fourth chance. And again, this wasn't a sign they were bad teachers. It was the complete opposite. It was their philosophy in action. And this quote, this really gets to the heart of it. A failed test is merely a not yet. It just perfectly captures their whole way of thinking. Instead of a fail being some kind of final judgment, this model just says, hey, you're not there yet. It's all about progress, not about failure. So how does this LBA model actually work? Well, it's basically 3 steps. First, they do theory first. They tackle the hardest part, that written test, right from the get-go. Second, they literally embrace retakes. They see it as a normal, necessary part of learning. And third, they give incredible support to help students stick with it, which, you can imagine, is absolutely crucial for students who might be taking the test in a language that's not their first. Okay, and this brings us to the final and maybe most important piece of the puzzle. Why does this story from Kentucky matter to everyone else? Because this isn't really just about beauty school anymore. It's about something much bigger, economic equity and creating real opportunities.
And look, this isn't just a one-off story.
There's federal research that backs this whole thing up. A really big study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis found that these kinds of strict and kind of arbitrary licensing rules can be huge economic barriers, especially for immigrant and minority communities that are just trying to build a career.
And the impact is not small, it's massive. That same research found that these rules can slash employment for the foreign-born population by nearly 20%. Just let that sink in for a second. That's like 1/5 of an entire community potentially being locked out of the workforce because of rules that don't really make sense.
And that is exactly why what Kentucky is doing is so powerful. They're hitting this problem from all sides. They're offering the exam in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Korean, and Chinese. They got rid of those pointless retake limits, and they're building a whole culture that values resilience way more than it values getting something perfect on the first try.
So let's just end on this one big question. This whole story out of Kentucky really forces you to think about what a professional license is even for. Should it be a gate that only opens for people who get it right the first time? Or should it be a path that proves someone has the skill, has the knowledge, and maybe most importantly, has the resilience to get it right in the end?